There comes a moment in many lives when you look around and feel strangely tired of everyone. Not angry, not dramatic, just tired in a quiet way, like a deep sigh that has somehow stretched itself across your whole being. And if you listen closely, you may hear that sigh saying something like, "I cannot keep pretending." Not pretending in the sense of being fake, but pretending that you are only the small person you think you are, locked inside a little bag of skin, forever needing to keep up with the crowd, forever worrying about what they feel, what they think, what they want from you. When you feel tired of everyone, it is not because people are too loud or too boring or too difficult, though they may indeed be all those things at times. It is because you have been carrying an image of yourself that doesn't quite fit anymore, like a shoe you outgrew without noticing. And the more you try to squeeze into that shoe, the more everyone around you begins to feel like pressure. The tiredness is the friction between who you think you must be and the quiet truth of who you already are. You see, most of us spend our days acting out a kind of social play. Not a dishonest play, but a complicated one. Each of us puts on a mask, what people call a personality. And we wear it for so long that we forget we're wearing it at all. We try to be polite, charming, helpful, wise, strong, mysterious, funny, successful. And the more we try to manage how others see us, the more exhausted we become, because keeping the mask in place takes energy, tremendous energy. It is like holding your stomach tight all day without noticing. At some point you simply cannot do it anymore, and the muscles shake, and the breath releases, and you think, "Oh, I am so tired." And when you are tired, the world looks tiring. But what if this exhaustion is not a failure at all? What if it is a sign that something inside you is starting to wake up? Like a person who has been dreaming for a long time and is now rubbing the sleep from their eyes. Being tired of everyone is often the first whisper that you have been trying too hard to be someone for everyone. And life is inviting you to stop. Imagine a tree for a moment. A tree does not try to impress the other trees. It does not say, "I must grow my branches just so, or the others will think I am strange." It simply grows. It responds to sunlight, wind, soil, rain. Some branches grow long, some short. The bark is rough in places, smooth in others. It bends when it must, and stands firm when it can. Now imagine if humans did this. If we simply responded to life, instead of trying constantly to manage how we appear in it. But we humans have a special ability. We can stand outside ourselves and watch everything we do. And that watching is a double-edged sword. On one side, it gives us great creativity and awareness. On the other, it gives us a very persistent inner commentator who always seems to have something to say. This inner voice is like a little supervisor who sits on your shoulder and says, "Do better, be nicer, impress them, don't disappoint them, don't let them think badly of you." It never seems to say, "Relax, be as you are." Over time, this inner supervisor becomes louder than life itself, and you forget that it is only a voice, an echo of old lessons, old fears, old expectations. And when you listen to it long enough, everyone around you starts to feel like a new assignment, a new performance, a new exam you must pass. No wonder you feel tired. You are not tired of people. You are tired of performing. Now imagine, even for a moment, that you stop listening to that inner supervisor. Imagine you let yourself be as naturally as a river flows or a cloud drifts. Not careless, not foolish, simply natural. Then the tiredness begins to change. It softens, warms, opens. Because it wasn't really people that tired you. It was the constant effort to be the you thought people needed. There is a little joke in this universe, and most people never hear it. The joke is this: the more you try to be the person others expect, the less they truly see you. And the moment you drop all that effort, when you stand or sit or walk as simply yourself, they feel strangely more drawn to you. It is like the difference between a clenched fist and an open hand. The fist tries to hold everything. The open hand receives without trying. People feel the same difference. When you are tired of everyone, you are often standing at the edge of a very important shift. A shift from living as your idea of yourself to living as your actual self. And your actual self is much simpler, much quieter, much more spacious than the idea. It does not need to be approved of. It does not need to impress. It does not need to cling. It is already connected to everything, because it is made of the same life that moves through birds, trees, rivers, clouds, and the whole shining universe. Sometimes feeling tired of everyone is your way of stepping back, so you can hear the deeper rhythm beneath all the noise. It is like silence between musical notes. Without the silence, the music would be nothing but chaos. In the same way, your tiredness is a silence calling you home. Home to yourself. Think of a wave on the ocean. A wave rises, dances, and falls. It may say to itself, I am tired of all these other waves bumping into me, splashing me, crowding me. But the moment it looks deeply, it sees that every wave, including itself, is the ocean playing at being many. And in that moment, the tiredness becomes something different. Not a rejection of the other waves, but a kind of gentle smile at the whole dance. You are that wave, and others are waves too. When you remember you are all the same ocean, the exhaustion loosens. And yet this does not mean you must run back into the crowd right away. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step aside, breathe, and be with yourself. Not in loneliness, but in the deep company of your own presence. People think being alone means something is wrong. But often, being alone simply means you are returning to your natural rhythm. Even birds sit quietly on branches for long stretches before flying off again. You may find that when you stop forcing yourself to engage, something interesting happens. Real connection begins to grow again, not from pressure, not from exhaustion, but from ease. You begin to enjoy people the way you enjoy clouds drifting across the sky. You don't demand that they behave a certain way. You don't measure them against your expectations. You let them be themselves, and you let yourself be yourself. And then being with others stops being tiring, because there is no longer any mask to hold up. But I want to tell you a secret, perhaps the most important one. When you feel tired of everyone, what you are really tired of is the idea that you must be someone for everyone. That is the hidden reason behind the feeling. It is not about the world outside. It is about the pressure inside. A pressure so quiet and constant that you hardly ever notice it until something inside you whispers, "Enough." That whisper is the beginning of wisdom. If you follow that whisper gently, not by cutting people out, not by becoming cold, but by relaxing your grip on who you think you must be, you might notice a lightness returning. You might begin to laugh again, not because everything is perfect, but because you no longer believe you must control everything. You may even begin to enjoy the strange, unpredictable playfulness of life, the way a child enjoys a game without worrying who wins. And then the tiredness that once felt heavy becomes a soft doorway. A doorway into a life where you don't need to force anything. A life where you meet people not as tasks to manage, but as parts of the same living mystery that you are. A life where you discover that the one you were tired of was never them. It was only the tight version of you that you thought you had to maintain. Relax that version just a little, and the whole world softens with you. There's a moment when you've been tired of everyone for long enough, that something starts to loosen in you. It happens quietly, like the way dawn comes. No sudden fanfare, no grand awakening, just a soft shift in the light. You notice you're not pushing as hard, not carrying quite so many expectations. And something in you, maybe for the first time in years, exhales. This is the beginning of learning to live without forcing, not by withdrawing from life, but by meeting it without the tightness that made everything feel heavy. You start to see that the tiredness you felt was never a sign that other people were too much. It was that you were too on, too attentive to every imagined rule of how to be acceptable, how to be lovable, how to be enough. Most of us treat ourselves like we're walking resumes, always needing to update, improve, polish, correct. And you may notice that when you're around others, especially many others, this sense of needing to be something becomes louder. So of course you get tired. Your inner supervisor has been working overtime. But tiredness, when it comes from this deep place, is not an enemy. It is a teacher, a wise one. It whispers, "There's nothing left to prove. Put the costume down." Now, something very interesting happens when you begin to put the costume down. You discover that you can listen to people without getting tangled in their moods. You can be with others without picking up every emotion they carry. You no longer treat every conversation like a performance review. Instead, you sit the way a mountain sits, open, steady, not trying to impress the clouds drifting by. And here is the lovely twist. When you stop trying to manage people, you begin to see them more clearly, not as threats to your peace or demands on your time, but as fellow travelers who are equally puzzled by this strange, beautiful play called being human. You see that everyone is improvising, just as you are, and suddenly the pressure lifts. You don't need to get everything right. You don't need to hold yourself together perfectly. Life has room to wobble a bit and still be life. But this clarity doesn't arise by trying to be detached or spiritual or wise. It arises when you simply let yourself be tired, without fighting, without pretending, without judging. Tiredness becomes a doorway into honesty. Because when you're tired, you no longer have the energy to maintain all the masks. And without the masks, what remains is simple: your own presence, your own being, as natural as a bird sitting on a branch. Being tired of everyone often means you've outgrown the version of yourself that once fit into all those everyones. You are expanding, and the old container has become too small. So life gives you this feeling, not as punishment, not as a warning, but as a gentle nudge, a hint that it's time to move inward for a while, to rest, to rediscover what you are when you are not performing. Think of a gardener who waters the soil and then lets it rest. If the gardener kept digging and poking and forcing the plants to grow faster, the soil would dry out. But when the soil rests, unseen things begin to happen. Roots strengthen, seeds wake up, life rearranges itself in the dark. Your inner life works the same way. Rest is not the absence of growth. Rest is the root of growth. When you turn inward, not in loneliness, but in simple presence, you begin to notice a kind of natural peace that does not depend on others behaving a certain way. It's a peace that comes from dropping the need to be someone special. A peace that comes from remembering that you are not a separate entity struggling in a vast world, but part of the same fabric that includes the world, the people, the stars, the silence between thoughts. Alan Watts often reminded people that you are not an isolated ego. You are the universe looking at itself from a particular angle. And when you really sense this, not as a belief, but as a felt experience, your tiredness begins to transform. You stop feeling like a small person overwhelmed by too many personalities. Instead, you feel like the sky that holds all the weather without needing to resist any of it. Let's imagine for a moment that you are sitting quietly beside a river. The water flows whether you watch it or not. The river does not ask you to approve of its currents. It does not demand that you fix anything. The birds call, the leaves rustle, the breeze moves without asking your permission. In such a moment, something in you relaxes, not because the world became peaceful, but because you stopped trying to manage it. This same peace is available when you are among people. You don't need to manage their thoughts. You don't need to carry their emotions. You don't need to match their speed. You simply exist, the way the river exists, the way the trees exist, effortlessly, neutral, with no project to maintain. When you see this, you begin to understand the secret behind feeling tired of everyone. The secret is that you had been trying to be responsible for too much, for their feelings, their impressions, their comfort, their approval. But you were never meant to carry all that. It is like trying to hold the wind in your hands. No wonder you felt exhausted. It cannot be done. And when you finally let the wind blow without trying to catch it, life becomes lighter. People become easier to be with. You begin to enjoy them the way you enjoy birdsong. pleasant when it's there, peaceful when it's not. No attachment, no aversion, just awareness. Sometimes you may still feel the tiredness rise again. That is fine. Tiredness is part of the rhythm. It comes to remind you to return home to yourself, to rest, recharge, and remember that you are not the role you play, nor the expectations you carry, nor the person others imagine you to be. You are the awareness that holds all of these, without being any of them. Now let's take this a little deeper. When you're tired of everyone, it often means you're tired of the thoughts you project onto everyone. You're tired of the imagined judgments, the imaginary comparisons, the unspoken expectations. These thoughts appear inside you, but you mistake them for the world outside. You think you're exhausted by others, but really you're exhausted by the stories in your mind about others. This is good news, because it means your peace is not dependent on anyone else changing. Your peace depends only on you seeing that your thoughts are like clouds, not solid, not permanent, not entirely yours. They drift across the sky of your awareness and vanish on their own if you don't grab them. When you see this, the tiredness becomes soft instead of heavy. It becomes something like the feeling of lying in warm grass on a summer afternoon, watching clouds pass by. Nothing to fix, nothing to force, nothing to chase, just being alive, quietly, fully. Gradually, something wonderful begins to happen. You start to enjoy people again, not because they changed, but because you no longer carry the burden of being anything for them. You can laugh more easily. You can listen with curiosity instead of tension. You can walk away without guilt and stay without pressure. You are no longer tired because you are no longer trying to hold the sky up with your bare hands. And here is the final twist. When you stop trying to be someone, people often feel more connected to you than ever. Because what they are meeting is not your mask, not your performance, not your careful social version. They are meeting your being, simple, open, easy. Being tired of everyone was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of finding yourself.
There are moments in life when words strike us with an almost eerie precision, as if they were spoken directly to us and no one else. You may have passed over the very same words before, perhaps even laughed at them or found them unremarkable. And yet suddenly, in the middle of your own struggles, they arrive with such clarity and such force that they feel destined, inevitable, as though the universe itself has conspired to deliver them into your hands. This is the mystery of timing, the way a message finds you not when you demand it, but when you are prepared to receive it. We often imagine that wisdom can be gathered like coins, that if we read enough, listen enough, think enough, we will finally hold it in our grasp. But real wisdom is slippery. It is not simply a collection of ideas to be memorized and filed away. It is a recognition, a shift of perspective, a kind of remembering of what you have always known deep down. And recognition cannot be forced. You may search feverishly, read endlessly, strain with every ounce of effort, but nothing happens until the moment ripens. Like fruit that will not sweeten before its season, wisdom will not open until you are ready. Consider how often this has been true in your own life. Perhaps someone once told you something you dismissed outright, only to find years later that the very same words became the key to your freedom. Or perhaps a book sat on your shelf, forgotten, until one day you picked it up and suddenly every page seemed to speak directly to your heart. The words did not change, you did. Your life unfolded through joys and sorrows, through mistakes and triumphs, and at last you arrived at the moment when those words could land. The message was waiting all along, but you had to live enough to hear it. This is why the message you are hearing now feels as though it was meant for you. Not because someone has tailored it, not because fate has singled you out, but because your life has ripened to the point where it resonates. It is not so much that the message found you, but that you grew into it. And in that growing, the meeting feels inevitable. Just as the river winding through valleys seems destined to meet the sea, so your path has brought you to this very moment where these words and your awareness converge. We do not like to think of life this way because it challenges the notion that we are in complete control. We imagine that we chart our own course, that growth is something we can schedule and demand. But notice how your greatest realizations have come to you. Did they not often arrive unexpectedly, as gifts you could not have summoned? The most profound lessons tend to come uninvited, often in moments of despair or confusion, when you were forced to drop your defenses and listen with a new kind of openness. It is not that suffering is desirable, but that it humbles us, softens us, makes us porous enough for wisdom to enter. Think of the way the earth must be prepared before seeds will grow. The soil must be turned, the weeds cleared, the rains must fall. Only then will the seed sprout, not because the seed has changed, but because the conditions have aligned. And so it is with the messages of life. They lie dormant around us, unnoticed, until at last the conditions within us are ready. Then, what was once meaningless bursts into significance, as though it had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. And so it may be with the message you are hearing now. You could have heard these very same words years ago and felt nothing. You could hear them again years from now and feel something entirely different. But here, now, they strike with the peculiar force of inevitability. They belong to this moment because you belong to this moment. And the two are not separate. You and the message are the same wave rising in the same ocean, cresting together, inseparable. It is tempting to call this fate, or destiny, or divine guidance. And indeed, those are names we give to this uncanny harmony between inner need and outer event. But the deeper truth is simpler. Life is whole. You and the words you hear are not two independent things colliding by chance. They are expressions of the same unfolding, the same awareness manifesting as thought, as sound, as recognition. The timing feels mysterious because you do not see the whole pattern. You see only the fragment, the meeting point, not the vast web of conditions that made it possible. But if you could see it all, you would know that it could not have been otherwise. When you look back upon your life, you may notice how many such moments have shaped you. The chance encounter that changed your direction, the unexpected failure that opened a new path, the heartbreak that taught you compassion. At the time, these events seemed random, even cruel, and yet, later, you may recognize them as the very ground from which growth arose. The teaching was there, embedded in the experience, waiting until you were ready to see. The message is not separate from the life that carries it. Life itself is the teacher, and every moment is a lesson. So when a message arrives that feels meant for you, do not cling to it as though it were a rare jewel to be hoarded. Instead, see it as the echo of your own awareness, calling back to remind you of what you already are. The truth of who you are cannot be given to you, for you already possess it. What the words provide is only a mirror, a reflection that allows you to see more clearly. The resonance you feel is the sound of your own being, recognized at last. This is why the message feels alive. It is not information, it is transformation. It does not merely add to your store of knowledge, but reorients your vision, turning you toward yourself. And when you feel it strike, it is because the timing is perfect, because the whole of your life has prepared you for this recognition. Nothing has been wasted, not the failures, not the doubts, not the fears. Each has played its part in bringing you here to this exact moment where the message you were meant to hear becomes audible at last. The curious thing about messages is that they are never truly finished. Even when a sentence ends, the silence that follows carries its own meaning. And when a lecture concludes, the words continue to echo in the chambers of the mind, reshaping themselves into new insights long after the voice has faded. A message that finds you is not confined to the moment of hearing. It lingers, germinates, grows. You may walk away believing you have understood, only to discover days later that the understanding has deepened, that the words have taken root in some hidden part of you. This is why we must be careful not to treat wisdom as though it were a possession, a jewel to be locked away in a cabinet. Wisdom is alive, and to treat it as a possession is to kill it. What was once vibrant becomes brittle, what was once fluid becomes rigid, and so, to keep wisdom alive, we must return to it again and again, not with the expectation of hearing something new, but with the openness to hear it differently. The words may not change, but you will, and each encounter will reveal something fresh. Think of it like returning to a river. You may step into the same stream again and again, but it is never the same water that touches your skin. The current moves on, new waters flow in, and so each visit is both familiar and entirely new. So it is with the teachings that move us. Each time you hear them, you are not the same person you were before, and so they strike you differently. They find you again at a new depth, in a new season of life, and the resonance continues. The greatest danger is to assume that once you have heard a message, you have exhausted its meaning. This is the arrogance of the mind, which seeks to categorize and conclude, to say, I know that already. But the most profound truths are not things you know once and for all. They are things you live moment by moment, again and again. To say, I know that I am not separate from the world, is not the same as living with the felt reality of inseparability. To say, I know that all things change, is not the same as flowing with change in the midst of loss. Knowledge can be stored away, but wisdom must be renewed in each breath. This is why the message you were meant to hear does not end with the hearing. It continues as a practice, as a way of being. It whispers in the quiet choices you make, in the way you respond to frustration, in the way you soften toward yourself and others. It is not a grand revelation to be remembered, but a gentle rhythm to be lived. So let us return to the question, why does the message arrive when it does? Why not sooner? Why not later? To answer this, we must look closely at the nature of readiness. We often think of readiness as something we can control, as though we could prepare ourselves perfectly for wisdom to enter. But readiness is not an achievement, it is a surrender. It is not that you make yourself ready, but that life wears you down until you can no longer cling to your defenses. Readiness is the collapse of resistance, the softening of the shell, the moment when you can no longer maintain the illusion of control. Think of the way a seed must crack open before it can grow. To the seed, the cracking may feel like destruction, like death. But in truth, it is the beginning of life. So too with us. Our moments of breaking are often the moments of greatest possibility. What feels like the end is often the opening, the place where light enters. And it is in those moments that the message finds us, not because it was absent before, but because we are finally porous enough to receive it. This is why suffering, though painful, often becomes the soil of transformation. It is not that suffering is inherently good or desirable, but that it dissolves the rigid certainties we cling to. It humbles the mind that believes it has everything figured out. It softens the heart that has grown hard with pride or fear. And in that softening, the message can enter not as a doctrine imposed from outside, but as a truth recognized from within. Yet there is another side to this. For just as suffering can prepare the ground, so too can joy. There are times when beauty itself is the message, when a sunset leaves you breathless, when music draws tears from your eyes, when laughter reminds you that life is worth living. In those moments, too, the message arrives, not in words, but in presence. The teaching is not always a correction. Sometimes it is an affirmation, a reminder that the world is already whole, that you are already included, that nothing is missing. And so the message is not bound to a single form. It may come as a lecture, a book, a conversation with a friend. It may come as silence, as nature, as the simple act of breathing. To look for it only in one form is to miss its endless variety. The message is life itself, unfolding in countless guises, always speaking, always available, but only heard when the ear is open. Now consider this. If the message always comes when we are ready, then perhaps every message you have ever heard was the right one at the right time, even if you did not recognize it as such. Perhaps even the words you rejected, the teachings you mocked, the advice you ignored, played their part. They planted seeds that lay dormant until the season was right. And even your resistance was part of the process, for it shaped the path that brought you to where you are now. This means that nothing is wasted. No conversation, no book, no experience lies outside the web of meaning. Even what seems irrelevant or mistaken may reveal itself later as essential. The fragments fit together in ways you cannot see, and only in hindsight do you realize that each played its part. So too with this message. You may not grasp it fully now, but perhaps later it will blossom, and you will look back with gratitude that it was waiting for you here. But there is an even deeper implication. If the message finds you when you most need it, then you too may become the bearer of a message for someone else. Not because you have all the answers, not because you must preach or persuade, but because simply by living, you become part of the pattern. A word spoken in kindness, a gesture of understanding, a moment of honesty, these two can arrive with uncanny timing for another. You may never know it, but your life may be the message that someone else most needs to hear. This is why it is important not to underestimate the power of presence. You do not have to contrive grand teachings or prepare elaborate speeches. Sometimes your simple being, your willingness to show up authentically, carries more weight than any doctrine. For presence itself is the message that life is whole, that awareness is enough, that nothing is missing. And so we return to the heart of the matter. The message you were meant to hear is not a secret code hidden away in distant texts. It is the ongoing revelation of life itself, unfolding in this moment. As you listen, as you breathe. The timing feels uncanny because you are beginning to notice the harmony that has always been there, the inseparability of inner and outer, of self and world. The message is not separate from you. You are the message, embodied, enacted, spoken in every gesture. To realize this is to find a profound peace. For then you no longer chase desperately after answers, as though they were hiding somewhere beyond your reach. You see instead that the answers arise with the questions, that the teaching and the student are not two. You see that life itself is the teacher, and you are both the listener and the voice. And in that recognition, the urgency drops away. You can rest knowing that nothing is missing, that what you need will find you when you are ready. So perhaps the greatest message of all is this: trust the unfolding. Do not rush, do not grasp, do not despair. The words you need, the experiences you need, the lessons you need, they're all woven into the fabric of life, and they will appear at the moment when they can be received. Trust that timing, for it is wiser than your plans. Trust that pattern, for it holds you even when you cannot see it. Trust that life, for it has carried you here to this moment, where the message you were meant to hear has found you at last. When a person begins to notice what others overlook, there is at first a kind of thrill. It feels like lifting a veil, like peering behind the stage into the machinery of the play. Suddenly, what seems solid and unquestionable is revealed to be shifting, relative, even dreamlike. Yet along with this exhilaration comes a quieter, heavier sensation, the realization that most people do not see and perhaps do not wish to. What you thought would be a shared discovery is instead a private burden. You may try to explain, to put into words, the insight that has dawned on you, but the language falls flat, and those you speak to blink as though you are speaking in riddles. It is as if you are pointing at the moon and they only see your finger. The danger of seeing what others do not is not so much that you are wrong, but that you are alone. Human beings are social creatures, and belonging is as essential as food or air. When the crowd looks one way and you are gazing in another, there is a current of unease. To be the only one who notices the emperor's new clothes is not merely a story about honesty, but about the peril of being out of step with the group. We draw safety from consensus, from the feeling that if everyone agrees, then it must be so. But the moment you glimpse something that contradicts the agreement, you find yourself at odds with the very fabric that holds people together. There is also the danger of arrogance. To see what others do not can feed the subtle belief that you are superior, that your vision grants you a special status. But this quickly becomes its own trap. For the moment you define yourself as the enlightened one, you have merely built a new wall between you and the rest. What began as a discovery dissolves into pride, and pride always isolates. The vision itself may have been clear, but the self that grasps it turns cloudy. In trying to hold on, you lose the very freedom you had glimpsed. Think of a child who suddenly understands a joke before anyone else in the room. They laugh aloud, expecting others to join, but the silence that greets them feels cold. The joy of recognition becomes embarrassment. In that instant, they learn that timing matters, that understanding out of sync with others can sting. Adults feel the same sting, though it wears the clothing of philosophy, religion, or insight. To wake up while others are still dreaming is not always a triumph. It can be profoundly lonely. And yet, what is it that we see when we see differently? Often, it is the fleeting nature of things, the fragility of what others call permanent. We notice that money, power, reputation, all the idols of society are as insubstantial as smoke. We notice that the roles people cling to with such intensity are costumes that will be dropped sooner or later. We notice that beneath the noise of ambition and fear, there is a silence, an openness that does not strive at all. To see this is to see through the game. And once you see through it, you cannot play it with the same seriousness again. But the others continue, earnest and intent, and your laughter sounds to them like madness. This is why so many teachers, poets, and mystics have spoken of exile. Not always a literal banishment, but a subtle one, the sense of not fitting, of being slightly out of tune with the orchestra around you. The music plays, but you hear a dissonance others ignore. And when you point it out, the players insist that everything is fine. You begin to wonder if you are the one out of tune, if the clarity that once felt liberating is instead a form of delusion. The mind wavers between certainty and doubt, and both carry their own weight. But consider that every vision, every new perception in history has always begun with someone who saw differently. The danger of seeing what others do not is real, but it is also the seed of transformation. Still, in the beginning, it feels like standing at the edge of a vast forest while the village insists the world ends at the meadow. You want to describe the trees, the shadows, the depth of the woods, but to them it sounds like fantasy. And so you stand with one foot in the known and one foot in the unknown, belonging fully to neither. This is the tension: to carry in your heart a glimpse of something wider, something truer, while moving among people who are content with their smaller maps. The danger is not only that they will misunderstand you, but that you will begin to misunderstand yourself, to doubt the vision, or to inflate it, or to guard it so fiercely that it becomes brittle. You may try to smother it, to return to ordinary sleep. But the dream of the world never fits again once you have seen beyond it. You may try to proclaim it loudly, but the louder you shout, the less others hear. And so you walk with it quietly, unsure whether it is a blessing or a curse. There is also fear, the kind of fear that whispers, if I let go of what the crowd believes, where will I belong? For belief is not merely a private act. It is the glue of societies, families, friendships. To question it is to risk unraveling bonds that feel necessary for survival. And so many who see hesitate to admit it, even to themselves. They carry the vision like a secret flame, shielding it from the wind of public opinion, never certain if they're protecting it or themselves. The danger is isolation, the danger is misunderstanding, the danger is pride, but beneath all of these, the deepest danger is that you will forget how to laugh. To take your vision so gravely that you become rigid, cut off not only from others, but from the very life that showed you this glimpse in the first place. This is why many who awaken fall into despair before they find peace. It is the dark night of seeing what others do not. It is not enough to notice the illusion. The greater challenge is to live with that noticing, to carry it gracefully among those who are still entranced. To be in the world but not of it, as some traditions put it, is not a slogan but a daily balancing act. And until that balance is found, the gift of sight can feel like a curse. For to walk in two worlds at once is never comfortable. And yet, what seems at first to be a curse reveals itself, with time, to be the very doorway into freedom. The loneliness of seeing differently is only sharp when you imagine that you must convince others that your vision has to be validated by the crowd to be real. The moment you let go of that demand, the burden softens. For truth is not dependent upon recognition, and awareness does not become less itself because it is unnoticed. The sky does not stop being the sky when clouds cover it, and the ocean does not cease to be the ocean when no ship sails its surface. In the same way, what you have seen remains what it is, whether or not another agrees. The resolution, then, is not to return to sleep, nor to shout at the dreamers, but to walk lightly, to live what you have seen without needing applause. When you understand that the world is play, that life is a dance, you can smile at the earnestness of those still caught in the game without condemning them. You see that their seriousness, their striving and fear are also part of the whole, just as your laughter and insight are. The one who sees is not apart from those who do not see, but an expression of the same reality, taking on a different mask. This changes the flavor of your vision. What was once heavy becomes light. The awareness that isolated you begins to connect you more deeply. For now you recognize that those who do not see are not wrong. They are simply playing another part in the cosmic performance. Without them, there would be no contrast, no stage upon which your own role makes sense. Just as music requires silence, Just as light requires shadow, the clarity of sight requires the backdrop of blindness. The difference does not divide, but completes. Think of the flower blooming in a field. It does not demand that the grasses beside it also bloom in the same way. It simply unfolds, radiates, expresses its nature. And in doing so, it contributes to the whole field, not by making others like itself, but by being precisely what it island. So too with the one who sees. The task is not to reform the world into your vision, but to live your vision as naturally as the flower blooms. In that authenticity, you become nourishment for others, whether they realize it or not. And sometimes, without effort, others notice. A word you speak casually, a silence you embody, a lightness in your presence, these become sparks that awaken curiosity. But even if they do not, nothing is lost. The play continues, the dance unfolds, and your part is no less vital because it is unrecognized. The true gift of seeing differently is not superiority, but freedom. You are no longer bound by the unquestioned rules of the game. You may play them if you wish, for the joy of it, but you are not deceived into thinking the outcome is final. You may step back when the game grows tedious, laugh when others are grim, and rest when others are restless. This freedom is subtle, but it changes everything. For when you are no longer driven by the compulsion to prove, you discover a gentleness that can embrace all. Even the danger that once haunted you of being alone, of being misunderstood, becomes part of the comedy. You see that every prophet, every poet, every thinker who glimpsed beyond the ordinary faced the same fate. And yet their words carried through time, not because they fought the blindness of their contemporaries, but because they simply sang their song. And so the invitation is not to fight, but to sing. To let your vision express itself in whatever way it wishes, whether in speech, in silence, in action, or in stillness. In this way, the danger dissolves into play. The one who sees and the one who does not are both the universe in disguise. There is no real separation, no real opposition. What looked like alienation is in fact another face of intimacy. For to be the only one awake in a room of sleepers is still to share the same room, the same night, the same dream. The laughter you carry, though quiet, is still part of the whole sound. And so, you may rest, you may see without clinging, you may walk without boasting, you may love without demanding agreement. The vision you carry is not a weapon, not a burden, not even a possession. It is simply the light by which you move, as natural as breathing, as effortless as being. And in time, you may even forget that you are different, for the difference no longer defines you. You are not the seer against the blind, but the whole itself, playing at many levels of awareness, all equally necessary, all equally divine. And perhaps the most subtle shift of all is this. What once seemed like your private vision begins to reveal itself as nothing personal at all. The sight that you carry is not your possession, not an achievement of the mind, but the universe opening its own eyes through you. In that moment, even the idea of seeing differently softens, for you recognize that all seeing belongs to the same awareness. The distinction between those who see and those who do not becomes less sharp, more playful, like the changing of roles in a play where each actor takes their turn under the spotlight. Consider the ocean again, with its endless waves. Some waves rise high, glistening in the sun, while others barely ripple upon the surface. To the eye, they seem distinct, greater or lesser, bold or quiet. But to the ocean, they are one movement, inseparable. The wave that sees its own crest does not look down upon the trough. It knows both of the same water. So it is with the one who glimpses beyond the usual illusion. Not superior, not apart, but simply aware that all are movements of the same depth. This awareness gives birth to compassion, For when you no longer feel compelled to drag others into your vision, you can love them as they are. The seriousness with which they chase their ambitions, the fears they nurse, the dramas they play out, all of it becomes endearing, as though you were watching children at play. Not condescension, but tenderness, because you recognize yourself in them. You too once played those games in full sincerity, and perhaps you still do, for even the awakened must sometimes forget in order to live. Forgetting is part of remembering, blindness is part of sight, and so you walk more gently, you listen more patiently, you smile more easily. The vision you carry ceases to be a sharp edge dividing you from others, and becomes instead a soft light by which you move among them. You are not required to convince or convert, only to live in such a way that your very being whispers of a freedom beyond striving. That whisper, whether heard or not, belongs to the music of the whole. Notice also how the danger dissolves when you see that what you feared isolation was never truly there. The feeling of being apart arose only when you believed that awareness belonged to you, that you were a solitary flame among darkness. But the flame was never yours. It is the fire of existence itself, and it burns in every heart, whether seen or unseen. You cannot be apart from it, any more than a drop of water can fall outside the sea. The very sense of separation was part of the illusion you were meant to see through. And what then remains? A deep ease, a kind of trust. You do not need to calculate how others will respond, or whether your insight will be accepted. You simply live, and in that living the truth finds its own expression. Sometimes it will flower visibly, sometimes it will lie hidden beneath the soil, but the life of it continues, regardless. You no longer demand outcomes, because you no longer confuse outcomes with reality. Reality is here already, shimmering in each moment, and you are not apart from it. This is why many who see differently eventually become playful again. They laugh more, they sing, they enjoy the simple things. For when the burden of proving and defending falls away, what remains is the joy of being, and that joy is contagious in ways words never are. People may not understand your philosophy, but they feel your presence. They may not follow your reasoning, but they sense your ease, and in time, that ease does more than any argument could. So perhaps the true resolution is not to stand above or apart, but to rejoin the play consciously, to move among others not as a stranger, but as a companion who knows the dream is a dream and still delights in its colors. To take part in the laughter and the tears, not because you are deceived, but because you recognize them as the texture of the whole. In this way, seeing what others do not ceases to be a danger at all. It becomes a gift, not only to you, but to everyone around you, even if they never realize it. And as the words slow and the reflection settles, perhaps you can sense the spaciousness in which all of this unfolds. The danger, the vision, the loneliness, the joy, all of it rising and falling, like breath, like waves, like the endless turning of the earth. To see is simply to notice this movement. To live is to be this movement, and to rest is to allow it all, without resistance, without demand, without fear.
Isn't it curious? The more you give yourself away, the less you are truly seen. If the sun never set, we would cease to notice its light. If a bird sang without pause, its song would dissolve into noise. But the moment you step back, the moment you withdraw into silence, suddenly your presence takes on weight. People feel the shape of your absence, and in that very emptiness, you are valued again. This is one of life's delicious paradoxes. What is constant becomes invisible, what is scarce becomes precious. I don't mean trickery, nor the silly business of playing hard to get. That is just another mask. What I mean is the art of honoring your own presence, of moving with the same rhythm you find in the tides, in the waxing and waning of the moon. for even nature does not give itself all at once, nor all the time. Whatever is constant and without limit soon feels ordinary. Its gift lies not in burning without end, but in the rhythm of rising and falling, appearing and disappearing. If the sun never set, we would soon grow weary of its light and long for shadow. So it is with you. Your presence has power because it comes and goes like the tides that advance and recede, like love that breathes in closeness and in distance. Respect is born not from endless exposure, but from the spaces in between. Have you noticed how quickly generosity turns into expectation? The one who always says yes is soon taken for granted, while the one who withholds at times is cherished when they appear. It is not about virtue, but about balance. To step back is to remember your humanity. You are not a machine, but a rhythm, like the sea that ebbs and flows, like the moon that waxes and wanes. For life itself is not a straight line, but a dance of presence and absence. Isn't it strange? The moment you cease to be forever at hand, the relationship takes on new life. For when you are not always there, people no longer treat you as furniture in the room, but as a presence to be encountered. They lean closer. They listen. They treasure the passing moment. Even your silence, even your absence begins to speak. We only notice the sweetness of water when it grows scarce. When it gushes everywhere, it is wasted and ignored. But when it is drawn from a deep well, each sip is savored. So it is with your presence. If you flood the world with yourself, you wash away your value. But when you come and go like the tide, your presence refreshes like cool water in the desert. From childhood we are taught to smile, to nod, to say yes, mistaking obedience for affection and availability for love. Yet love, like a garden, needs space to breathe. Too much rain drowns it, too much sun withers it. It flourishes in rhythm, not excess. Absence is not emptiness, but the interval that gives shape. Just as music is made not only of notes, but of the silence between them, so too love ripens in the dance of nearness and distance. Without the pauses, all dissolves into noise. Life is like a melody. And so if you never step back, never say no, you too become noise. Seen but not noticed, heard but not listened to. Value lies in the interval, the well-placed absence. This is not neglect, but rhythm. The tree does not bear fruit in every season. Fire does not burn forever. It must die down so it can be kindled again. Even breath itself depends on exhaling as well as inhaling. Why imagine you must give without rest? When you withdraw and return, your presence gathers weight, like the hush that makes the bells strike resound. And here is the paradox. By making yourself less available, you become more real. People meet your wholeness, not the fragments you scatter. Like the man who speaks rarely, it is not his words that are louder, but his silence that makes them precious. So it is with your presence. Given without pause, it is diluted. Held with rhythm, it gathers intensity. This is why stepping back is sometimes the most loving act of all. Look at love itself. Lovers who clutch too tightly smother the flame, while those who vanish altogether let the fire die. The art lies in rhythm, closeness and distance, voice and silence, embrace and release. Notice how the man who is seldom available is the one most carefully attended, not because his busyness is a virtue, but because his time carries weight. If he gives you a moment, it feels like a gift, for it has not been scattered like seed on barren ground. Contrast this with the one who is forever waiting, forever bending, whose presence is taken for granted precisely because it is always at hand. This is not a question of superiority, but of recognition. When you honor the worth of your own hours, others are compelled to honor them too. But if you spend them carelessly, the world will treat them as trifles. And so, To stop being always available is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is the quiet refusal to leap at every summons, to patch every quarrel that is not yours, to serve as the eternal remedy for other people's restlessness. It is to stand rooted in yourself, and from that stillness to act when the moment is right. For your life is not meant to be endlessly consumed, but to be lived, richly, deeply, sincerely. And only from such fullness can you give in a way that nourishes, rather than exhausts. Now here is something quite remarkable. When you cease to be endlessly available, you begin to hear your own life again. For in forever tending to others, you drown the small secret music within. Your days are filled with clamor, but your soul remains unheard. Step back and suddenly you catch the whispers, the quiet callings, the subtle joys, the long-buried desires that rise like forgotten seeds breaking through the soil. To be available to yourself is the beginning of authenticity, and without authenticity, love itself becomes counterfeit. Every yes that betrays your own being is in truth a silent no, and from such denials only resentment can grow. There was a man who spent himself in the service of others, giving until he was emptied. Yet for all his sacrifice, he remained unseen. At last, exhausted, he stepped back. And only then did the world protest. They called him selfish, cold, neglectful. But slowly, something curious began to happen. In his absence, they began to feel the weight he had long carried. For the first time, his presence was no longer taken for granted, but respected. In stepping back, he had not lost love at all. He had opened the door for love to appear, where once there had only been convenience. So you see, to become less available is not an act of rejection, but of invitation. It is the invitation for others to wake up to your presence, and for you to wake up to yourself. For only in the open space between two beings can respect take root and love draw breath. When you are forever at hand, no one stops to wonder who you are or what you truly give. But when you withdraw, when you refuse to play the endless part, suddenly they must pause. They must look. And in that moment of seeing, the whole pattern begins to shift. Why, then, is this so hard? Because we are frightened. We imagine that a single no will banish love. We fear that if we step aside, we shall be forgotten. We tremble that if we honor our own worth, others will not. But ask yourself, if someone values you only so long as you are endlessly at their disposal, is that love, or is it merely convenience? Much of our suffering, you see, is not caused by what others do to us, but by what we permit. Out of fear of displeasing, we stretch ourselves thin, we give beyond our means, we say yes when the heart cries no, and then we cloak this self-betrayal under the name of kindness. But it is no kindness to betray yourself. To give what you do not have is like offering an empty bowl. True kindness flows only from fullness, and fullness requires form. To cease being endlessly available is to honor that form. To say, I am human, I have rhythm, I have worth. And yes, some may drift away when you step back, but then you discover a deeper truth. They were not with you at all, but with the endless fountain they mistook you for. Better to be cherished for your reality than tolerated for your exhaustion. Better to lose those who drained you than to lose yourself altogether. And here again the paradox shows its face. Those who truly matter, those who truly love, will not vanish when you step back. They will bend with you, as trees bend with the wind. They will grow into the space you create, and in that very movement, the bond deepens. So when you cease to be forever at hand, you do not become less, you become more visible, more authentic, more real. You gather together the scattered fragments of yourself and return as a whole being, and life always bows to wholeness. For wholeness has its own gravity. It draws, it attracts, It commands respect without demanding it. The broken self clamors to be noticed, while the whole self is noticed without effort. You cease to be background noise and become the very music to which others listen. Picture yourself as a well. If all may draw without end, the waters will one day vanish, and both you and they will be left thirsty. But when the well is guarded, when it is given time to fill again from its hidden springs, then those who come to drink find refreshment. To withdraw at times, to cease being endlessly available, is simply to keep the waters of your life pure and flowing. This is not selfishness, but the very condition that makes giving possible. From a full well, the water is sweet. From a dry one, nothing can be drawn. Yet the world will not at first thank you for this. Those who were accustomed to your endless flow will call you selfish, accuse you of change, and indeed you have changed. You are no longer a tool to be used, but a being who gives from freedom. This unsettles those who lived upon your weakness, but it strengthens those who honor your strength. In time the numbers may grow fewer, but the bonds grow deeper. For love that is real does not fear your boundary. It bows to it. So then we come to this curious question. Who are you when you're not forever on call, forever answering the ring of the world? Who are you when you sit still, when you stop chasing, when you listen to the hum inside your own skull? Most of us forget, you see, because we're so busy being useful to others that we've misplaced ourselves. But in the silence, in that delicious nothing, you suddenly stumble upon yourself again. And far from being empty, it's wonderfully full. To withdraw is not to desert life, but to return to it. For in stepping back, you discover that life is like breathing in and out. If you only breathe out, you collapse. If you only give, you dry up. The rhythm of the tide is the rhythm of being. You see? It's the old paradox. In not seeking, things come to you. In not clutching, they remain. And so, curiously, when you stop demanding respect, people respect you. When you cease to be always available, you become truly present. You don't have to insist on your worth, you are it. So, the game is not about being endlessly busy, endlessly agreeable. It's about rhythm, sincerity, wholeness. Say yes when it's a real yes. Say no when it's a real no. Step forward when you're full. Step back when it's time to fill. That isn't selfishness. That's simply the wisdom of the dance. And then, as if by magic, life begins to keep the beat with you.
There comes a time, you see, when the strength you've always carried begins to tremble beneath its own weight. You wake up one morning, and though nothing terrible has happened, you feel as though you've been carrying the world for too long. People still say you're strong, that you handle things well, that you always seem composed, but inside there's a small voice whispering, I can't keep doing this. Not because you've failed, but because somewhere along the way, strength became a costume. We are taught from a very young age that to survive, we must be strong, to stand firm, to endure, to push through. But the problem is, we're rarely told what kind of strength we're supposed to have. So, we begin to mistake hardness for resilience, silence for composure, and endurance for peace. We think being strong means not breaking, but in reality, life was never about being unbreakable. It was about learning how to flow, to bend, to soften, and to let go. You see, the ocean is strong not because it resists, but because it yields. It gives way to every current, yet nothing can destroy it. And so it is with us. The strength you've been chasing, the strength you've been praised for, is the kind that hides pain under control. But true strength, the kind that comes from being alive, doesn't need to control anything. It is the quiet acceptance of what already is. When you are tired of being strong, it is not a sign of weakness. It is the beginning of wisdom. Because the kind of strength that exhausts you was never truly yours, it was borrowed from fear. The fear of falling apart, the fear of being seen, the fear of disappointing others. You've held everything together for so long that the idea of letting go feels like dying. But perhaps that's the point. A kind of death is necessary before you can be alive without pretending. Most people live as if life is a test of endurance. They measure their worth by how much they can withstand. But what happens when endurance becomes emptiness? When you've been so composed, so self-contained, that you've forgotten what it feels like to be held by something larger than yourself? The truth is, no one can carry life alone. The river doesn't push itself forward. The tree doesn't lift itself toward the sun. Strength, as nature shows, is always in cooperation with the invisible. So perhaps what you're feeling now, the exhaustion, the quiet ache, the sense that your inner walls are crumbling, is not failure at all. It's simply the moment life has chosen to remind you that strength was never the goal. Presence was. You've been so good at holding things together that you've forgotten what it feels like to fall apart safely. And that is why you're tired. Not because you're broken, but because you've been living as though the whole universe depends on your composure. Imagine, just for a moment, if you didn't have to hold it all. Imagine if the world didn't collapse when you stopped pretending to be fine. What if the strength you need now is not the kind that carries, but the kind that releases? To cry when you need to admit that you're lost, to rest without guilt. What if the most powerful thing you could do was nothing at all? To simply breathe, to be, to exist as you are, not as the person you've been performing, but as the being beneath all the performance. When you stop trying to be strong, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see that everything you were holding together never needed your strength to exist. Life keeps moving. The world continues to breathe, and you, too, begin to breathe differently, slower, deeper, without resistance. It's a strange kind of freedom to realize that your collapse is not a tragedy, but a transformation. It's the caterpillar dissolving in the cocoon. It doesn't fight to hold its form. It allows the melting. And what emerges is something it could never have imagined while it was clinging to its old identity. So, if you are tired of being strong, let that tiredness be holy. Let it be your teacher. Because the end of forced strength is the beginning of true surrender, and surrender is the birthplace of real power. You might think surrender means giving up, but that's only because you've been taught that control is safety. You've lived as though your grip on things is what keeps life from falling apart. Yet, if you watch closely, everything you love has always been beyond your control. The sunrise, the laughter of a friend, the timing of grace, none of it was your doing. And yet it arrived perfectly. Strength isn't about holding the tide. It's about learning to trust its rhythm. You see, we mistake life for something we must manage, when in truth, it's something we are invited to experience. When you are tired of being strong, it means you're ready to stop living from the surface. You're ready to let the current carry you back into your own depth. But there's something tender that happens in this stage. You begin to grieve. You grieve the person who always showed up, who never complained, who carried everything without asking for help. You grieve the mask of strength that protected you for so long, even though it was never meant to last forever. It kept you safe once, but now it's only keeping you distant. In that grief, something sacred unfolds. Compassion. You begin to see yourself not as the hero of your suffering, but as the child of the universe, fragile, imperfect, and completely loved. The universe does not demand that you be strong. It only asks that you be real. There's a peace that comes from realizing you no longer have to prove your resilience. You no longer have to appear put together to be worthy of rest. The truth is, you are not admired for your strength. You are loved for your being. And perhaps that's why you've grown so weary, because strength was never meant to be an identity. It was meant to be a moment. You were never supposed to stay strong forever. You were meant to soften again and again until you remembered how to feel. When you stop striving to be strong, your heart becomes available again. You begin to feel life's subtleties, the way silence hums, the way small moments expand, the way simple things like sunlight through a window can make you cry without reason. You rediscover what it means to be alive, not because you've regained your old strength, but because you found something deeper, the strength to be open. The world doesn't need your armor, it needs your aliveness. It doesn't need your perfect posture, it needs your presence. The real power of a human being lies not in endurance, but in receptivity, the courage to let the world touch you. So if you find yourself exhausted, unable to keep being strong, don't fight it. You're not falling behind. You're finally aligning. You're remembering that existence itself has always been strong enough to carry you. There is a hidden grace in reaching the end of your strength, because that's where you discover the strength of life itself. And life, you see, never needed you to perform. It only ever wanted you to be. And so, when you've stopped pretending to be strong, when the armor finally slips and you can't keep your composure any longer, something extraordinary begins to happen. It isn't loud and it isn't dramatic. It's quiet, almost invisible, like the sound of rain at dawn or the gentle exhale after a long-held breath. For the first time in perhaps years, you are no longer fighting life. You are letting it hold you. You begin to realize that the world was never asking you to carry it. All this time, you've been trying to shoulder what was always meant to flow through you. Emotions, moments, people, they were never possessions. They were passing clouds. And the moment you stop trying to hold them in place, the sky clears. It's strange, isn't it? You spend years believing that if you let go, everything will fall apart. But when you finally do, you discover that what falls apart was never real to begin with. The image of who you were supposed to be, the perfection you were meant to maintain, the reputation you worked so hard to uphold, they dissolve quietly. And beneath all that, you find something soft and alive, yourself, unguarded and free. Now, I don't mean that everything becomes easy. The waves of life will still come. The uncertainties will still whisper, but you meet them differently. You no longer brace for them, you breathe with them. You see, life has always been a rhythm, a dance between strength and surrender. You can't hold your breath through the entire song and still call it dancing. Real strength is a kind of participation. It's being able to stand in the storm without needing the storm to end. It's allowing yourself to tremble and still say, this too is me. In the great flow of things, what endures is not the rigid but the supple. The bamboo bends and does not break. The river cuts through stone, not through force, but through patience. And in that same way, when you let go of the need to appear unshaken, you discover a resilience that cannot be destroyed. When you are tired of being strong, it's life calling you home, home to a way of being that is effortless, a way that doesn't strive to manage or maintain, but simply to move in harmony with what is. This is not resignation, it is awakening. The understanding that the universe was never separate from you. The wind that breaks the branch is the same wind that carries the leaf. There is a subtle peace that arises when you stop trying to be the one holding everything together. You realize that even your so-called failures were never really yours. They were the universe learning through you, expressing through your form for a while, then moving on. And when you see this clearly, the guilt fades. You no longer feel like you've disappointed life, because you begin to see you are life. You cannot fall out of it. It is in those moments, sitting quietly in your own company, where strength and softness finally become one. You start to notice things again. The taste of morning coffee, the rhythm of your breathing, the way sunlight spills through the curtains, small, ordinary miracles that had been drowned out by your endless effort to stay strong. You realize how much beauty you missed while you were busy being unbreakable. So now you can finally rest. You can let life hold you instead of trying to hold it all together. You can admit that you don't always know what you're doing, that you're not always fine, and that maybe you never had to be. Because in truth, strength was never about never falling. It was about learning to land. You see, the tree that loses its leaves each winter does not mourn their loss. It trusts the cycle. It knows that what falls away will one day return, transformed. And you, too, are part of that same rhythm. The self that breaks is not dying, it is shedding. The weariness you feel is not the end, but the beginning of renewal. There's something deeply freeing about realizing that you don't have to earn peace. You don't have to prove your worth through resilience. Peace comes when you no longer resist what is. It comes when you stop reaching for tomorrow and simply rest in the completeness of now. When you stop trying to be strong, you become real. You begin to love without condition, to feel without shame, to exist without needing to explain. The softness you once feared becomes your strength. It's the kind of power that doesn't dominate, but understands, that doesn't force, but allows. It's easy to think that the world only respects the loud and the unyielding, but all things that endure, mountains, oceans, silence, do so through stillness. That stillness is your true strength. It isn't born from control, but from connection. It's the strength of water, of breath, of being at peace with not knowing. So, when you feel yourself faltering, when you can no longer keep up the act of composure, don't resist it. Sit down, breathe, and let yourself be carried. You don't need to fix what was never broken. You only need to remember that you are allowed to be soft. Because what holds this universe together is not force, but love, not effort, but flow. And the moment you stop fighting that truth, life rushes back in, not to demand more of you, but to remind you that you were never alone in the first place. Strength was never the goal, you see. The goal was wholeness. And wholeness includes everything: the tears, the laughter, the fatigue, the surrender. So if you are tired of being strong, you are right where you need to be. The storm is not against you, it's clearing you. And when the rain finally stops, you'll find yourself standing in a world that feels strangely new, not because it changed, but because you did. You stopped pretending to be the one carrying the world and allowed the world to carry you. And that, my friend, is real strength, the kind that needs no witness, no applause, no armor, the kind that simply is. There comes a time in every life when the idea of losing starts to feel familiar. You've done everything right, or at least tried to. You've followed the rules, set your intentions, given your best. And yet, the world doesn't seem to reward your persistence. You reach for things and they slip away. You open your heart and it gets bruised again. You try to grow, and still you find yourself circling the same lessons in different forms. It's in those moments that you begin to wonder, not in bitterness, but in quiet weariness, if any of it has meaning. What's strange, though, is that even in that weariness, something in you still shows up. You still wake up. You still breathe. You still try. It may not look like ambition anymore, but a quieter rhythm of being, not the roar of trying to win, but the whisper of simply continuing. That life is not a problem to be solved, but a dance to be enjoyed. But when you've been losing for a long time, it's difficult to remember the dance. You start to think that life is testing you, that the repeated setbacks mean something personal, that the universe is keeping score. You look around and see others moving ahead while you seem to remain in place. That comparison cuts deeper than defeat itself. But what if you were never meant to win in the way you imagined? What if the whole idea of losing was an illusion born from the mind's addiction to measurement? The river doesn't lose when it bends. The wave doesn't fail when it falls back into the ocean. It's all the same movement. Every time you think you've lost, it's only because you were measuring life by something that was never stable, results, recognition, outcomes. But life isn't stable. It's alive. It breathes, it collapses, it blooms again. The flower doesn't think of the winter as a loss. It simply rests until it can rise again. When you're tired of losing but still show up, something beautiful begins to happen. The trying becomes quieter. The motives soften. You no longer push out of desperation, but from a kind of sincerity, not because you believe success will save you, but because it feels true to participate. You realize that effort itself can be a kind of devotion, even if it doesn't yield victory. And maybe that's what grace really is, showing up without knowing why, trusting that the act itself is enough. You see, the mind divides life into winners and losers, but life itself knows nothing of such divisions. It only moves, it expands, it contracts, it explores. What you call failure is just the other half of creation, the part that teaches humility, patience, surrender. Without it, there would be no wisdom, only vanity. When you've lost enough times, the ego begins to crack, and through those cracks, light starts to enter. You begin to see that the purpose of the loss was not to punish you, but to soften you, to make you less certain that you were ever in control. And in that softening, you start to discover a deeper kind of strength, not the will to dominate circumstances, but the capacity to remain open within them. Imagine standing in the rain. You can curse the weather, fight to stay dry, or you can simply let yourself get wet. At first, it's uncomfortable, but soon something shifts, the fight leaves you, and what's left is sensation, coolness, texture, aliveness. You realize the rain isn't against you. It's just happening, and so are you. That's what happens when you stop treating loss as an enemy. You start to live again. You start to see that showing up, even soaked and tired, is its own kind of victory. You may not realize it, but every time you get back up, you're demonstrating something sacred, that consciousness is resilient. That awareness cannot truly be defeated. Even when everything falls apart, the part of you that watches it fall remains untouched. That witnessing presence, that's who you really are. The rest is just the story of a character learning how to love impermanence. When you begin to see from that stillness, losing takes on a different flavor. It's no longer humiliation, it's revelation. It shows you where you were attached, where you mistook temporary forms for truth. Each loss removes a mask. Each setback peels away another layer of illusion. And eventually, what's left is not a winner or a loser, but a being at peace with the game itself. You begin to understand that the act of showing up, even tired, even uncertain, is what life has been trying to teach you all along. To show up not as a conqueror, but as a participant. To move not for gain, but because movement is your nature. When you show up like that, even losing feels sacred, because you see that nothing was ever truly lost. It only changed shape. The effort transformed into learning, the failure into compassion, the exhaustion into stillness. If there is one secret the universe whispers to those who keep showing up, it's this: you are not being tested, you are being tempered. Life isn't interested in breaking you, it's teaching you to bend. And so, every time you think you can't take another loss, another setback, another disappointment, notice that somehow you still do. You're still breathing. You're still here. That is not weakness, that's grace. You've mistaken it for endurance, but it's something far more subtle. It's the quiet understanding that your worth was never tied to winning. That life's invitation was never to succeed, but to participate in its unfolding with open eyes and an undefended heart. When you understand that, losing stops feeling like the end of something. It becomes a pause, a reorientation. The silence between notes in the music of becoming. And in that silence, you might find something you've been missing, not success, but peace. There's a rhythm you start to notice after losing enough times. It's not loud. It's almost hidden beneath the noise of disappointment. At first, all you hear is the echo of your own frustration, that voice inside that says, I can't keep doing this. But if you listen long enough, the echo fades and you begin to hear something quieter, a pulse, a kind of still music beneath the struggle. That pulse is life continuing through you, no matter what. It's what keeps you standing up when every part of you wants to stop. It doesn't care about results. It doesn't even care about hope. It just moves. It's the same energy that brings the tide back after the retreat, that pushes the seed to crack open even in barren soil. You don't control it. You are it. When you begin to sense that, losing no longer feels final. You start to see that every so-called failure has been shaping you into something softer, wiser, more real. You realize that it's not your strength that kept you going, but life itself expressing through you. The truth is, you never chose to keep showing up. You were chosen by something deeper than will, the part of you that knows that even heartbreak is worth feeling if it means being alive. There's a certain beauty in that surrender. It's not dramatic. It doesn't shout or seek recognition. It's the quiet dignity of still showing up to life, even when no one is watching, when there's nothing to win, nothing to prove. You start to understand that perhaps showing up is all life ever asked for. The sun doesn't rise to win the sky. The waves don't move to impress the shore. They show up because that's their nature. And maybe that's your nature too, to move, to try, to feel, to fall, and to rise again. When you're tired of losing, the temptation is to stop caring, to withdraw your tenderness. But that's how the heart hardens. What life invites instead is a different kind of caring, not the effortful caring that drains you, but the open caring that flows without expectation. There is a form of strength that only comes when you stop defending against pain, the kind that no longer needs to be right or successful or admired. It's the strength that lives in vulnerability, the strength that says, even if I fall again, I will not close. That's what the universe recognizes, not your victories, but your willingness to stay open. Because openness, no matter how tired, is a kind of prayer. If you've been losing, it doesn't mean you're doing life wrong. It might mean you're finally doing it honestly. When pretense falls away, so does certainty, and what remains is the raw, unfiltered experience of being human. It's messy, it's painful, but it's real. And in that realness, you find something that winning could never give you: intimacy with existence itself. The people who seem to have everything often live on the surface of life. Those who have lost, who have been stripped bare, are the ones who touch its depth. They know how fragile joy is, how precious ordinary moments are. They've been to the bottom, and they know there's no treasure there except understanding. When you stop running from that understanding, a new kind of peace begins to bloom. It's not the peace of control or success, but the peace of being at home in your own imperfection. You start to smile at your mistakes. You begin to see the humor in your old seriousness. You realize that life was never mocking you, it was teaching you to laugh. You remember how children play. They lose constantly, and it never matters. They fall, they cry, they get up, and the game goes on. Somewhere along the line, you forgot that the game was meant to be played that way. The spiritual path, in truth, is a return to that innocence. It's not about transcending failure. It's about rediscovering the joy of participating. So when you wake up tomorrow and feel that familiar heaviness, that whisper that says, I can't keep doing this, remember that you don't need to do it in the same way. You can show up differently, softer, slower, without the armor. Show up not as a fighter, but as a witness. Show up not to conquer the day, but to meet it. There's no need to fix everything today or ever. The ocean doesn't fix the shore. It just arrives, again and again, until the rocks themselves soften. That's how life shapes you, through the persistence of presence. You'll find that once you stop demanding results, something inside you starts to rest. The exhaustion that once felt endless begins to lighten. You realize that you don't need to win anymore. You just need to be here. And strangely enough, that's when life starts moving in your favor, not because you forced it, but because you stopped resisting it. When you stop trying to make everything happen, you create space for things to unfold. What once felt like loss begins to look like redirection. What once felt like stagnation begins to look like stillness. You discover that every time you showed up through your fatigue, you weren't proving your worth, you were remembering it. The part of you that still rises, still participates, still believes in beauty, even when everything hurts, that part is untouched by defeat. It doesn't need recognition. It doesn't need reward. It simply is. That's the real victory. And one day, when you look back, you'll see that what you called losing was actually the slow removal of everything false. What remained, what kept showing up, was the truest part of you. So yes, you may be tired of losing, but you have not been losing. You've been learning how to live without needing to win. And that, quietly, is how you begin to win without trying. There's something extraordinary that begins to happen when you finally stop fighting the story of your life. You still wake up each morning. You still face the same uncertainties, but the air around everything feels different. It's as though the tension in the invisible threads that held you to an idea of success has loosened. You still show up, but now there's a softness in the gesture. You begin to understand that showing up was never about proving your strength. It was about remembering your belonging. You see, most people misunderstand perseverance. They think it means clinging, forcing, pushing through until something changes. But true perseverance is quieter than that. It's not the will to keep moving for the sake of progress. It's the willingness to stay present even when nothing makes sense. It's staying in the room with life itself, even when every instinct says to run. When you've lost enough, something begins to purify in you. Your ambitions, once sharp and demanding, start to melt into something gentler. You no longer need to chase validation. You no longer need to prove that your path is correct. You begin to notice that even your failures have been faithful companions. Each one came to reveal another layer of illusion, another place where you were confusing effort with essence. There's a curious grace in those moments when you realize that you can't keep controlling outcomes. The kind of surrender arises, not because you've given up, but because you've seen through the futility of grasping. When you let go of control, you begin to see that life never needed it. The river knows where to turn, the wind knows where to blow, the tree knows when to let its leaves fall. You don't need to direct it. You only need to participate in its rhythm. That participation is what it means to show up. It doesn't require enthusiasm or certainty. It only asks for presence. There are days when your showing up will look like joy and creativity, and there are days when it will look like simply breathing. Both are equal in the eyes of life. The human mind loves to measure, to rank, to name one thing better than another. But in the vastness of being, all expressions have their place. The sunlight and the rain both belong. The laughter and the silence are both sacred. You begin to realize that there is no such thing as wasted effort, because every movement teaches you something about the nature of flow. When you stop seeing life as a contest, your heart begins to open again. It's as though an old wound starts to breathe. You realize that most of your exhaustion was not from doing, but from trying to make everything mean something. You were asking each moment to justify its existence, and in doing so, you missed the beauty of simply being here. There's an old saying that enlightenment is not about becoming divine, but about becoming fully human. To feel deeply, to fall, to rise, to care, to let go. That's the real dance. When you participate in life without demanding victory, you start to sense a quiet joy emerging from the simplest acts. Making a meal, holding a hand, watching light move through leaves. There's no grandeur in these moments, and yet they carry a tenderness that nothing else can match. That tenderness is the beginning of peace. It comes when you no longer divide the world into what should be and what is. You see, all suffering begins with resistance to what is. You believe that things should have gone differently, that you should have been further along, that life should have been kinder. But the moment you stop arguing with reality, something miraculous happens. The pain doesn't disappear, but it softens. It becomes a companion instead of an enemy. And from that softness, wisdom begins to grow, not the kind that comes from knowledge or experience, but the wisdom that comes from allowing. It's the kind of knowing that whispers, "This too belongs." You start to see how even your losses were forms of guidance. Each door that closed was protecting you from walking where you weren't meant to go. Each disappointment was redirecting you towards something your mind couldn't yet imagine. Every person who left was teaching you the difference between attachment and love. Love, in its truest form, is not possession or certainty. It's participation without guarantee. To love is to show up even when you might lose, even when there's no promise of return. And that's what makes it sacred. You realize that life itself is a love affair, wild, unpredictable, sometimes devastating, but always alive. And to keep showing up for it, even when it breaks your heart, is to honor its mystery. There's a passage in the Tao Te Ching that says, "Do your work, then step back, the only path to serenity." For years, that sounded to me like resignation. But what it really means is that serenity doesn't come from withdrawal, it comes from trust. When you step back, you make room for life to breathe through you instead of around you. You stop trying to pull meaning from the world and start allowing meaning to reveal itself. That's why so many of your greatest moments come after surrender. You reach the edge of your own endurance, and in that collapse, something else takes over. The effort stops, and in its place arrives grace. You realize that the power you were seeking to cultivate was never yours to begin with. It was always the universe moving through you. You don't need to generate it. You only need to stop blocking it. When you act from that understanding, life becomes lighter. You still work, you still strive, but the strain is gone. You move as a musician plays, not because you have to, but because it feels natural. Even when the melody changes, you keep playing, because that's what the song demands. That is the grace of showing up. It's not about heroism, it's about harmony. To show up with grace is to no longer treat life as something to conquer, but as something to accompany. You stop demanding perfection from yourself or others. You stop trying to manipulate timing. You learn to bow to the seasons of becoming. There will be days when you fall apart again. That's part of it. You'll wake up feeling heavy, lost, uncertain. But now you'll know that even this is sacred. You'll see that you can be tired and still present, confused and still kind. That's what it means to live awake. Life never promised you clarity. It only promised you experience. And the willingness to experience it fully, without turning away, is what makes you whole. So, if you are tired of losing, but still find yourself showing up, remember this: you are already succeeding in the only way that matters. You are participating in the mystery with your heart open. You are letting life live through you. You may not see it, but every breath you take in that awareness ripples outward. Somewhere, someone else feels less alone because you kept showing up. Somewhere, the world softens because you chose to stay. And maybe that's what winning really is, not triumph over life, but union with it. You'll still fall, you'll still lose, you'll still forget. But you'll also remember, again and again, that it was never about being invincible. It was about being present. When the next moment of defeat comes, meet it gently. Don't analyze it. Don't rush to overcome it. Just breathe and say, "Ah, this too." Then step into the next moment, and the next, and the next. You'll find that showing up isn't something you do, it's what you are. Even when you're tired, even when you think you've lost, life continues through you. And that continuation, that quiet persistence, is the heartbeat of existence itself. You don't need to know where it's leading. You just need to walk with it. And somewhere along the way, you'll look around and realize you were never losing. You were only being shaped. You were only being loved in a way that demanded you let go of every illusion of control. You were never meant to win against life. You were meant to dance with it. And even now, as you stand there, tired but present, you are already dancing.
You know, we have this peculiar habit of believing that we are looking out at the world. But did you ever stop to wonder who's doing the looking? Now imagine a mirror. A perfect mirror has no color, no shape, no agenda. It doesn't try to reflect, doesn't try not to reflect, it simply does. And in the same way, the world you see out there is a reflection not of what is, but of what you are. Not what you think you are, oh no. Not that polite little ego in a skin bag. But what you actually are, the whole works. The cosmos waking up and saying, "Ah, so this is what I look like when I'm me." You see, it's quite funny, people imagine they are in the universe, like marbles in a box. But it's more like the universe is in them, poured through a nervous system and interpreted through a lens called eye. And just as your eyes cannot see themselves and teeth cannot bite themselves, you cannot see you. You can only see the reflections. The glint in another's eye, the twist of circumstance, the heartbreak, the laughter, the traffic jam, the falling leaf for you. So then, the question is not whether the world reflects you, but whether you're willing to see yourself in it. Because if the mirror is cracked, you call the world broken. But if the mirror is clear, suddenly everything is shimmering, dancing, absurd, divine. So, what is the world? Only your own face wearing 10,000 masks. And if you smile, it just might smile back. Now, let's be clear. You don't see reality. You evoke it. That is what you call the real world, hard, objective. Over there is nothing more than a grand conversation between you and what is. Not a thing, but a dance. Not a noun, but a verb. You see, a rock is not hard unless there's a hand to touch it. And the sun is not light unless there's an eye to behold it. Without skin, fire is not hot. Without ears, thunder makes no sound. So then, hardness, heat, brightness, and noise, all the qualities you take for granted as being out there, are actually the echo of your own structure. In other words, you create the sun, you create the rain, you create the distance between your chair and the moon. Because without you, there's no far or near, no up or down, no color, no time. It's all relationship. And when you begin to notice this, really notice it, the world gets, well, slippery. Because you can no longer say, "I'm just observing." You're participating. You're part of the paint in the painting. You see, there isn't a world happening to you. There is only a world happening with you. A world that rises to meet the shape of your mind. So when you gaze out at the mountains, the cities, the clouds, the mess, the miracle, you're not just seeing the world. You're seeing your relationship to it. And so, if what you see is always cruel, always grey, always lacking, you must ask, is it the world that's dull? Or is it simply the way the mirror has been tilted? So here we are, you the observer, the one inside, peering out through these curious little holes in your face, called eyes, watching the world go by like scenery outside a train window. But here's the twist. You are not watching the show, you are the show watching itself. The separation between subject and object, knower and known, is a marvelous illusion, one that lets the cosmic dance feel like a duet, when it's really a solo wearing two masks. And if you try to find where the observer ends and the observed begins, well, you can't. They arise together, like a front and a back, like inhale and exhale. Can you have one without the other? You see, when you look at a whirlpool in a river, you might say, there's a thing. But the next day, you come back and it's not the same whirlpool, because there was no whirlpool. Only whirlpooling. So in the same way, you are not a thing. You are a process. A dancing of the universe at one tiny point, where it decided, I shall look at myself, right here, through this being. And that being, quite mistakenly, began to think of itself as an island. But, my dear fellow, there are no islands, only coastlines in motion, only the sea, in curious shapes. Now let's talk about mirrors. A mirror, you'll notice, is a strange thing. It shows you everything, yet it has no image of its own. It receives, but does not cling, reflects, but does not judge. It doesn't say, I like that face, but not this one. It doesn't try to change your hair. It doesn't hold on to yesterday's image, or anticipate tomorrow's smile. It is simply clear. And so it is with the mind, when it is not clinging, not grasping, not editing experience to suit its little story of me. The Taoist sages said the highest human uses his mind as a mirror. It grasps nothing. It refuses nothing. It receives but does not keep. When the wild geese fly over the lake, their reflection appears in the water. But the geese do not intend to cast a reflection, and the water has no mind to retain their image. Now that is freedom. But we, you see, we tend to treat the mind not as a mirror, but as a scrapbook. Snapping photos, clinging to wounds, comparing, editing, deleting, as if life were a story we're trying to get right instead of a song we forgot we were singing. But what if you stopped? What if you allowed the moment to pass through you like light through glass? What if you let go of the need to comment, to control, to correct? Then the mind becomes like a mirror again. And in that still, silent surface, you might finally see the one who was always there, not watching life, but being it. Funny thing about looking, the more earnestly you try to find yourself, the more you seem to disappear. Just try. Try to grasp who you are. Not your name, not your profession, not your thoughts or your opinions. Those are like clothes on a hanger. What happens if you go behind the mask? Deeper. Beneath the bones, under the breath, behind the watcher of your thoughts, there's no one there, is there? And yet something is. It watches without comment. It feels but doesn't flinch. It is there when you are 5 and still there when you're 50. But it has no age, no face, no voice. It just is. You say, I think. But can you find the thinker? You say, I feel. But where is the feeler? The more you look, the more you see that the one searching is also the thing being searched for, like trying to bite your own teeth. And this isn't a failure, it's the very joke. The divine prank. The universe pretending not to know itself, so it can play at finding out. The self is not a thing inside a body, peering out. The body is the world, folding in. And what you call I is simply how it feels to be that fold. So you see, it isn't that you are in the universe. You are what the universe is doing, right here, right now, in this peculiar shape. There's something quite extraordinary about silence. Not the absence of noise, but the silence that's humming inside every sound. The silence that isn't empty, but so full it spills into form. Like the mirror that reflects all things, yet remains untouched. Like space holding stars, music, bones, laughter, but never clinging. That silence is not separate from you. It's not something you enter. It's what remains when the commentary stops, when the mind forgets to name and the world forgets to explain. And suddenly, there it is. Not peace as an achievement, not stillness as an effort, but a kind of listening that listens to nothing and everything at once. When they asked Vimalakirti to define the void, he didn't write a poem. He didn't offer a theory. He said, nothing. And in that nothing, the room thundered, because silence isn't the opposite of speech. It's the source of it. The mother of all words, the womb of all worlds, and when you touch it not with your hands, not with your mind, but with your whole being, you realize something odd. You don't need to fix the noise. You don't need to escape the chaos. You don't need to quiet your thoughts. You just stop fighting. And, like mist on a warm morning, it all dissolves, leaving not answers, not doctrines, but this strange echoing presence that has no name, because it never needed one. If you sit very still and just look not at any particular thing, but just look, you'll start to notice that there's no edge between you and what you see. At first it all seems very obvious. There's the world, and here you are. You, the observer, the looker, the thinker, the feeler. That old familiar sensation of being in here somewhere, peeking out through the eyes. But the more clearly you observe, the more this boundary begins to blur. It's not that the world disappears. Rather, it begins to echo you. And you might notice something gently startling. Everything changes depending on the mood in which you meet it. When you're tense, the trees look jagged. When you're at ease, even the cracks in the pavement have charm. You walk into a room expecting coldness and find coldness waiting. You expect resistance and somehow everything resists. This isn't mysticism or magic. It's participation, relationship. There's no such thing as a reflection without a surface to reflect it. No such thing as a smile in the mirror, unless there's a smile in the face that stands before it. And so, if what you see is always bitter, always broken, always lacking, the mirror is doing nothing more than showing you your own face. Of course, it doesn't hold the image, it doesn't judge, it doesn't edit. It simply reflects perfectly, precisely, instantly. You say, but I want the world to love me. Well, start the echo, because the mirror is not out there. It's here. It's everywhere. And it's waiting. No effort required. No technique, no trick. The geese fly across the lake and cast their reflection in the still water. The water doesn't plan to hold their image. The geese don't try to leave it behind. This is how it works. Everything moves. Everything reflects. Nothing clings. It is only when we begin grasping, insisting, demanding that the surface distorts. To be at peace with the mirror is to no longer require it to flatter, to no longer beg it to change. And when that happens, when there's no need for performance, you might catch just briefly the glimpse of something very quiet looking back. Not a voice, not a thought, not even a person, just presence. That is you. Not the you usually talk about, not the name, not the role, not the one who signs documents and rehearses arguments. Something deeper. The same awareness that was there before the name was learned, before the story began, before anyone told you who you were supposed to be. It's been there the whole time, silent, unmoving, unconcerned, watching the whole thing unfold like a dream. It has no opinion, it has no ambition, it simply is. And it cannot be seen because it is the seeing. It cannot be grasped because it is what grasps. It is what the Upanishads called Tattivam Asi, thou art that. The universe, all of it rises in you as sound rises in a bell, as light appears in the eye. You do not live in the world happens in you. When the wave knows it is the ocean, it does not fear crashing. When the dancer knows they are the dance, there is no need for applause. And when you remember not as a belief, but as a knowing beneath knowing that you were never outside this, never separate, never lacking, then the whole game becomes beautifully transparent. The music continues, the shapes change, the story evolves, but the silence beneath the music, the stillness within the motion, remains unchanged. That stillness is not a void to be feared. It is fullness, it is the mirror with no dust, the sky with no clouds, the awareness with no face, and if from time to time you forget, as forgetting is part of remembering, the mirror will still be there, reflecting. Because the face it shows was never missing, and the one who's been looking all along was simply the looking itself.